Hello, welcome to Technology Trends, a television program about ancient history and new technology. I'm your host, Patrick Bailey. Today we continue our series on symbolism, and we are going to talk about the subversive use of sacred symbolism in the media. And once again we have as our very special guest Michael Tsarion, who speaks on this topic here in the Bay Area and internationally. Mike, once again, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Patrick. Nice to be here.
Although this is a continuing series, I believe this is segment 5, why don't we summarize for the audience what is this particular topic and how did you get interested in it?
Well, I've always, as we spoke on other programs, I've always been interested in symbolism in its context to mystical practice and yoga and mythology and astrotheology. But there is also, in Ireland, where I started getting interested in this, I came across certain scholars who had written about the fact that there is such a thing as subliminal advertising, for instance in billboards and magazines. Many American writers of great esteem and academic qualifications have written on the subject. For instance, Brian Wilson Key, you may have heard of him. He wrote a wonderful book called Subliminal Seduction and Age of Manipulation. Then you have an American back in the 50s called Vance Packard, who wrote extensively on the fact that Madison Avenue media giants and some of the great monopolies are implanting aesthetically conditioning motifs, politically conditioning motifs in their advertisements. And then Gene Kilborn, also an activist from the 60s, who has written extensively on this, and also about the denigration of the female in the media, which I'm sure we should all be familiar with, how both women and the youth and even animals are treated in advertising commercially and so on. And that opened a door for me because I didn't first myself realize that there was a connection between the mythologies of the world, and the great high symbolisms, the great arts, and this corporate side. But they started to converge, and it became a big interest. Specifically when I discovered that not only is there such a thing as subliminal persuasion, but that many of the devices and the machinery of subliminal persuasion is very occult. I studied the occult my whole life, and suddenly, almost with a kind of a shock in a way, to discover that there is occult symbolism, and the word occult meaning hidden, of course, that's all the word really means, but coming out even out of the magical societies. So I actually discovered when I was about 15 that actually sacred symbolism that once, before the industrial age, going back in time, symbolism that was designed and meant to uplift our soul, uplift our spirit, is actually now being used for quite the reverse. And that a sacred symbolism, like a star for instance, will be put onto a product, then we are having this emotional and symbiotic and even spiritual response to something, but actually it's based on, it's an appetite. It's to motivate the appetites, not the spirit. So this is what happens, and I found that this was a pernicious phenomena in our society, and tried to set about doing something to make people savvy and aware that great power symbols coming out of the ancient matriarchal and Egyptian cultures, for instance, and the Semitic line, what have you, these are now being used in the corporate world to negative effect, and it is having a negative effect on our dreams and on our unconscious.
Wow. And you give workshops nationally on this topic?
Yeah, this is a very, of all the things that I do teach, this is the one that people are very fascinated with and respond to very strongly, because it's like taking a large weight off the shoulders when you realize that this is what's going on. And of course, you see, people see symbolisms all the time. Magazines, billboards, on the sides of buses, on the clothes that we wear. I mean, they're absolutely everywhere. But because they are separated by time and space, I mean, they're out there in the ambiance, in the atmosphere, you don't see the underlying themes. So I started just by cutting things out of magazines, for instance. What happens is if you pool them together, if you bring a lot of the symbolism together, like the symbol of the sun or the symbol of the pyramid or what have you, then it's easier for them to see the underlying theme. When you're driving in the car and you're out there, it's very difficult to see any underlying pattern. It's just a bunch of symbolism polluting the airwaves and polluting the atmosphere and the ambiance. But when you condense it, then people really do accept that there is a theme, there is an agenda, and there's similar motifs that are being used just by a few elite monopolies.
Well, most people are completely unaware of this, and they would probably think at first glance that this might even be silly. So what is the response for someone who actually learns your teachings or sees this program? What would be the normal response?
Well, I think that if they really give it proper thought and really think about it, it's so innocuous. You know, Conan Doyle said, if you want to put something in hiding, if you want to hide something or disguise it, you put it where it's most obvious. You put it in plain sight. And this is an idea that we have to sharpen what I call our symbolic cognition or our symbolic literacy. It's really a part of our spiritual growth, but you see, spiritual growth is twofold. You can build up your light body, you can develop your religious and spiritual sensibility, but that's like cleaning up a room where the garbage is still being thrown on the floor. So your cleaning process is kind of redundant. The spiritual process is both anabolic and catabolic. At the same time as you're building up your own wisdom body, you have to have a hand on keeping out the negative. You know, and Schopenhauer has written on this, that our consciousness is just besieged with stimuli. We need to be also making sure that that ceases to come in. So a lot of people have a healthy interest in building up their level of purity and their level of wisdom. I don't doubt that that sensibility, that desire is there in everyone. But then why, after 2,000 years, is there hardly any result? It's because we have been taught, or we've been conditioned to forget about a very important part of spiritual development, which is the physical capability, the skill, if you will, of keeping out all the debris. That's part of it.
Well, we have over 100 examples in the slides that are coming up of examples of this to
That's
teach
right.
people.
I have brought some slides, and I'd like to get into that. And I'd also like to say that in regards to the response, I find that children, because I do teach children, this in the New Age Academy in Berkeley, for instance, I teach a class there on communications and this kind of thing. This response with children is especially strong, because they are being taught right now to consider that it is absolutely chic to be wearing corporate logos from head to toe, you see. But the slides that I have brought with me, I'd like to be pointing out, making it very clear that America, for instance, the occult presence in America is very strong. From the earliest days of the founding of America, we have personalities and we have symbolism, some sacred symbolism, even in the architecture of cities and so on. And we have an occult presence, people involved in fraternities and secret societies. And this gentleman, Albert Pike, was one of those personalities. He was the man who created the Scottish Rite Freemasonic Lodge system throughout America. He was a disciple of Giuseppe Manzini, and Giuseppe Manzini was a disciple of Adam Weishaupt, who was the head of the Illuminati in the 17th century. It turns out on May 1st, 1776, we have an order coming out of Bavaria called the Illuminati, and it's interesting that America's birthday is July 4th, 1776. So two very important events take place in 1776. One is the forming of a super secret society in the world, run by Adam Weishaupt, and then we have the founding of America. So there is a connection, and there has been a very strong occult presence in Europe, but of course also in America. And people may not actually realize just how close to home that presence is. For instance, Martin Luther, who we do recognize as being the founder of Lutheranism and eventually the Protestant faith, on the original manuscripts that Martin Luther wrote in, which you can still visit in, I think, Wittenberg or Worms in Germany and so on, you will see on the front cover of the manuals that Martin Luther used the symbol of the Rose Cross, which is an occult symbol relating to the Rosicrucian fraternity. And coming specifically to America and its connection to symbolism and Freemasonry, this Freemasonic presence is the presence that brought many symbols out of the past. So the column, when we see buildings, these beautiful Renaissance style white buildings in civic centers, the idea of the column and even the obelisk represented actually the polar axis of the Earth. So things that we see every day represented something of an occult property to do with astronomy and astrology. The column being the symbol of the polar axis of the planet Earth. And the column was actually the symbol, the phallic symbol of the ancient god of the Earth. And that is why it is often, you will see the obelisk in proximity with a round lake or a round pool of water representing the female, you see. And here is a picture, a photograph of your Congress, and in the background, if I could draw your attention, the whole room is actually designed based on occult geometry, but specifically in the back on either side of the American flag are two symbols. It's not too clear there, but what they are, and you also find this on the dime, is what we call a fasces. It's a bundle of rods with an axe in the center. And this is where we get the word fascist from, in fact. The word fascist comes from the word fasces, which is a Roman symbol coming out of the ancient past. So those are two profoundly occult symbols. And the very fact that there are 3 tiers there, that the representative is sitting 3 tiers high, has a lot to do with Freemasonry and the first 3 degrees of Freemasonry.
That's right.
And why I'm bothering to explain this is because this is the background of the symbolism, so that later when we find out how it permeates into the corporate world, we have to understand who would put it there. That symbolism is very much at the heart of things that are very close to us today, which is government, business, education, and advertising. And one of the most important of Freemasonic symbols is what we call the checkered floor, or the floor of the house. And you'll often hear that euphemism said by politicians when they say, would the speaker come to the floor of the house? That term is Masonic and has to do with the checkerboard. Here we see the same image on an apron, which Freemasons wear. And there you have the eye and the symbol of the sun. We're going to get to the symbol of the sun. So important occult symbols flourishing. And here's, again, like you asked, if people have resistance to this, well, they may as well realize that most of the founding fathers were heavily involved in Freemasonry. And I'm not saying that Freemasonry is anything negative per se, but it is very symbol-rich. It is not a religion, it is a theocracy, a theology, or a theosophy. It is an occult fraternity. And it is steeped in ancient symbolism coming out of the ancient past.